Forward to the corner. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon, building a fundraising program from scratch. My name is Sean Mooring. I am the director of programs at the Lenfeset Institute for Journalism, and I am glad to welcome you to our session this afternoon, as it will be a conversation with the 19th Chief Revenue Officer, Johanna Derlega, and Lenfeset Institute's Director of Advancement, Rebecca Forman, who will be discussing how they each individually built launched their fundraising programs, and you'll get to hear it from the perspective of both a nonprofit agency as well as a for-profit legacy outlet. And we encourage you to, while there will be opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation, we'll also encourage you to drop questions in the chat while the presentation is going on, and we'll be monitoring that, and both will address them as they move forward. So I'm going to spotlight Johanna and Rebecca and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Sean. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today. If you've been attending Summit programming, you likely know that a handful of things have been recorded, but Johanna and I are here in real life. So we are both with you. So please add questions in the chat. We have a few things we're going to talk about, but we really want this to be sort of an organic conversation all about starting a fundraising program. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, and something that Johanna and I spoke about, is so she obviously, the 19th is this brand new, amazing news organization that has grown exponentially in the past year, and really from an idea to this very sustainable news outlet producing amazing journalism. A lot of my responsibilities at the Institute center around our fundraising at the Inquirer, at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is a legacy for-profit news operation that now is also supported by philanthropy. And so one of the things we'll talk about today is also the start of a community giving campaign there. So although the Inquirer is by no means new, the idea of philanthropy there is only a few years old. So we're excited to chat with you all and hear what you all have to say as well. So really, please do use the chat, and we look forward to hearing from you. So Johanna, as we start, I wanted to just chat a little bit about your background. And we talked about this a little bit also. I come from a fundraising background, newer to journalism. Today is actually my 3-year anniversary at the Institute. You come from a journalism background, newer to fundraising. So can you share a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband always says that I have newsprint running through my veins. I guess I don't know exactly what it would be in the digital world, but yes, I'm like a 3rd generation newspaper media person. And I've always loved it so much. I always knew that this was something I wanted to pursue. But ultimately, I started seeing, for me, this is mission-based work. I love supporting journalism. And ultimately, what I started seeing in the for-profit news space was that either there were 2 options to create sustainability. One was putting your content behind a paywall, and then the other was really going for scale. And to me, your defined audience backs into your editorial discipline. And what I started seeing at some of the news organizations where I was, and also other news organizations, was that as people were going for scale, they were writing for everyone, and then therefore they were really writing for nobody. And I stopped feeling a sense of mission. So I actually left media. I started my own consulting practice, and Emily reached out to me about writing a business plan for the 19th when I was a consultant, which I did. And I really had not thought too much about the nonprofit news business. I live in DC. I'm in Beltway media. That was my background. And so there were really not a lot of options here. And so I have to say that the thing that has been so amazing about this journey is that I feel aligned with the mission again. I understand we have a defined audience. We have a defined mission, and our diversified nonprofit model has allowed us to do what that's what I started this industry doing. And I feel that my passion and my love for media has really come back because I'm able to work in a news organization that's nonprofit and really operates for our audience primarily.
So that's so wonderful and so great that you're somewhere that's so mission-based and obviously focused on raising all of your revenue. Although I know your work focuses on institutional giving, major giving, not necessarily the membership community support. The 19th now has this very, very diverse revenue stream. So although not subscriptions, all philanthropy, but from all sorts of different kinds of angles. And can you talk a little bit, as you were thinking about building this program and what the 19th needed to be sustainable and to be successful, what were your goals around revenue diversification, both at the kickoff and then as you think about sustainability long term?
Yeah. So at kickoff, I mean, we did our soft launch 2 months before COVID hit. So what we expected was that it was going to come from a couple of different areas. One was philanthropy. So that's major donors as well as foundations. Another is corporate revenue, advertising, that's sponsorships, for events. It's also newsletter advertising and website advertising, and then membership. And we knew that membership was never going to be our biggest revenue source, but it was a huge indicator for us if we were achieving our mission, if we were, actually reaching it, we were continuing to engage our audience. And so those were really the areas that we pursued. We really honestly thought in the first year that it was going to be pretty evenly split between philanthropy and corporate support through sponsorships and advertising. And once COVID hit, we knew that there was, corporate advertising and sponsorships they literally just shut down. And so last year was a tough year, but ultimately what we found was that outside of mortality rates, women were being disproportionately impacted by COVID, by the pandemic, by quarantining, caregiving, economically. Frontline workers are more likely to be women. And so we actually, we were really a needed differentiated news source in the midst of what was a really scary time. And so what we found was we actually brought in more philanthropy dollars than we expected and fewer corporate sponsorship dollars. That is, this year we doubled the sponsorship that we did last year. Philanthropy is still the largest portion, but what we're hoping is that this will be an even split, because last year was a perfect example. If we had been a for-profit, we never would have launched, because we would not have had the support that we needed to actually go through a full launch and to then thrive. I mean, we are really, we're in a very good financial position now because of the diversification.
That's really wonderful to hear. And I think, for those of us who are also, raising resources for existing legacy publications, it's been different. It's about adding philanthropy as a revenue stream, because the ad revenue of the 90s is no more. The print revenue days are also declining. And so philanthropy has helped to plug and create a new revenue stream where there has been a lot of loss. But we think a lot in fundraising about people want to give to something that's growing, that's successful. They want to be a part of something great. They don't want to save something from bankruptcy. So I guess talk a little bit about, obviously the coverage you guys do at the 19th is uplifting, it is inspiring, but it's also sometimes really hard. The issues, especially of the past year, have not been easy, especially not on women. And so when you think about that messaging, and when you're talking with your donors about what they're supporting, sort of what are you sharing? How are you uplifting them? Because, although you've proven all this work over the last year, initially you were asking them to invest in a mission or a product that wasn't yet tangible. So how did you do that? How did you inspire them to give?
And ultimately it was the differentiation. It was mission first, and it was differentiation. This was different than what was happening in most newsrooms. Most newsrooms, there are a lot of newsrooms across the country that are struggling to survive. Creating or having diversity in a newsroom, allowing that to be a lens for your coverage is not a priority because they're in a survival fight. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that most politics and policy news organizations are based in Washington. They're for Washington. They're about Washington. We are certainly covering policymakers. You can't have a politics and policy news organization without that, but we're also covering the people that policy impacts. And that is a huge differentiator of other politics and policy news organizations. And honestly, there's more power in the people now than probably any other time since the civil rights movement. So we actually are covering, nationally, huge political campaigns covering the people. And so I think that has been, the differentiation is really huge. And we're seeing more mainstream news organizations, legacy news organizations doing more of this coverage. But this is the centerpiece of what we do. 70% of our newsroom are women of color. We also have 2 openly trans reporters, because we also, in addition to women, it's also LGBTQ. It's anyone who's marginalized based on their gender. And so that's what we will continue to do. We feel like, as we expand, at first we had reporters that were covering the economy and healthcare, and now we have a caregiving reporter. We're in the midst of hiring an environmental justice reporter. We have a K through 12 reporter. We're covering the military. We're now expanding, and the thing is with this lens, it can be applied anywhere. This is not about women's issues or LGBTQ issues. This is about taking every issue, which is an issue for all of us, with this lens. The people that we're covering are people who have been marginalized based on their gender. And so I think it will continue to be a differentiation because it's the centerpiece of what we do. And I think that for a lot of, especially, certainly sponsors have their own interests, but in terms of from a fundraising standpoint, that's a narrative change. That's something where, this coverage is needed. Inequities, it's important to uncover them, but we are really honestly also in a place where, from an audience standpoint, people are they're exhausted, and reading the news is exhausting. We've seen the audience numbers, right? We've seen that this is impacting. And so for us, it is also about bringing the stories of what's working, the stories of next generation leaders who are building movements in their own communities. And so it's really about both. And it's and I think that we're doing a great job of not only highlighting what are challenges, intractable challenges that need solutions, but we're also bringing in uplifting stories, which I think is also important from an audience engagement standpoint.
Absolutely. I think it's hard. It's hard when we're only reading sort of the doom and gloom of what's happening in the world. Mm-hmm. So speaking of audience, one of the things that I think is so interesting about starting a fundraising program from scratch at a legacy organization versus a new organization is that for us at the Inquirer, there's a donor or there's a subscriber base. And especially the print subscribers, these are folks who have expendable income. They have the paper delivered to them every day. They clearly care about the mission, although they may feel like they're already paying a lot of money for this product. And that's a hurdle we've had to overcome. These are often longtime loyal readers, not unlike a university having alumni where that university is so sort of ingrained in their culture and their feeling of self. The Inquirer is very much part of somebody's identity if they're in Philadelphia and they've been a longtime reader. And so what we did when we first started to launch sort of our more community level fundraising program was we could take a look at, who's already subscribing, who's reading this digitally. We could wealth screen all of them. We had this audience for which to, find the needles in the haystack in terms of fundraising. But for the 19th, you're starting from nothing, no reporting, no audience. So what did that look? And we know that if we think about the funnel, folks are going to come in as readers, and eventually we want them to be donors, and of course major donors. So when you thought about like launching this program, how did you think about building audience and the importance of those two things sort of happening in tandem?
Well, before we even had a website, you know, we had a partnership with the Post, and the Post was, and then we also with the Philadelphia Inquirer as well. Aaron Haynes was doing portraits of the pandemic, so we were using partnerships as a way to kind of tease out who we were. There was a lot of earned media. You know, Emily Ramshaw, our co-founder, is the youngest member of the Pulitzer Board. You know, she's well known. She's editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, so there was a fair amount of earned media. And again, we had a very differentiated mission, and we were mission forward. When we talk about who we are, it's simple, right? It is so clear what we're doing. And I think that also helps, you know, crystallizing it, making it really clear for people, especially when you don't have the proof in the pudding yet, right? You don't have anything to point to other than some links on the Washington Post, and we had a newsletter. But ultimately, there was no public space to be able to showcase what we do as we do now. I mean, now it's like, go to the website, see what we're covering, or, you know, see how we're covering it. I think the other thing was the pandemic. I think that it was so clear that there was a need for this coverage, again, talking about, you know, the impact on women and the LGBTQ community. And then I think the other thing was, and I think it was in a lot of ways, I mean, I hate to even say it, but I think it was fortuitous for us in some ways that everyone was home, that we, you know, initially we were going to be working with you. We were going to come to Philadelphia. After we launched in August, at the 100th anniversary, the centennial of the 19th Amendment, we were going to have our website unveiled, and the next day we were going to have an event in Philadelphia. And at most it would have attracted 500, 1,000 people. But as soon as we knew that we were going to have to do this virtually, we said, let's swing for the fences. We initially got Meryl Streep. She wanted to do suffrage readings. Zoe Saldana did suffrage readings, and then we got the Go-Go's. And then, so it almost started, I mean, we knew we had, you know, Tammy Duckworth, we had Hillary Clinton. I mean, we had amazing keynotes. We ended up having Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. But initially, I think one of the first people that we secured was someone from Hollywood. And we did want that, you know, we wanted to have the hard-hitting politics and policy conversations, but we also wanted to have some symbolic performances to bring in cast that wider net. And it was 5 days of programming. I mean, we didn't have an events person. Emily and I were, you know, it was just a group effort in terms of pulling together our speakers. And I think that's what put us on the map. Right? We already had a dedicated group of followers who read articles about us, started following us on social, signed up for our newsletter, gave money. But that summit, that 5-day summit, was what really pushed us into the stratosphere in terms of engagement. And I do think that, I know that we won't always be in this COVID time, but I think that there is now a new normal in terms of digital programming and being able to reach people across the country, even if you're in one space, to be able to bring people in, you know, swinging for the fences. And even if they can join you virtually, that you are able to cast a wider net and bring in more audience. And so I think that was really then that put us on the map. And now we're still, I mean, we just had our last summit, which was amazing also, but that success begets success and brings in more and more audiences. And I think that was really a huge moment for us. And I honestly wonder, if we hadn't been in a virtual environment, how our audience would be different. I think it was very instrumental.
As you think about that, what did you see in sort of the growth of fundraising numbers coming out of that first summit? And what did you see, both fundraising numbers from individuals, but also from foundations? And, you know, I think sometimes for individuals, it's our own pocketbooks, right? So our own wallets, we can hand off those resources as we are inspired. But for funders, there are hoops and boards and a lot of things to jump through at institutional organizations. So how did you think about engaging those folks as part of the summit, and what did you see in follow-up in terms of fundraising growth?
So that week was in terms of individuals, in terms of members, and as someone who's under, our major donors are $1,000 and above. And it was just an explosion. I think by the end of, I could be wrong, but I think at the end of the summit, we had about 6,000 members. It was poof. It was just amazing. And by the end of last year, we had 10,000. So it was from that standpoint, again, I think it was so important. Now, from the fundraising standpoint, we already had a lot of interest. Emily is amazing. She is not only a gifted, editor and editorial visionary, she's really good at fundraising. And so she was on the path even before, she'd raised a couple $1 million before we even soft launched. And by the time we had the summit, there were a lot of people who wanted to be a part of us at launch. Now, obviously this continues, we're continuing to grow. We're continuing to bring in additional. There are some funders who love the startup. They may not come back to us because they're more startup. They're interested in startup. There are others who want to see what you're accomplishing. They want to know that you have impact. And so in some ways, the baton has been passed a little bit, right? There are some that just are not probably going to come back to us simply because that's not what they do. They're launch funders, where there are a lot of other people who, and there are so many. Even just looking out at other news organizations, looking at gender studies programs at universities, there are so many people, especially right now, interested in equity work. And so I feel in a lot of ways we've only, it's the tip of the iceberg. But one of the things that we did, so we had a consulting firm. We had basically a fundraising consulting firm helping us that first year. And in January, we hired a director of foundation philanthropy and a director of major donors so that we can actually really, having those full-time people has really, again, pushed it to the next level.
You spoke a little bit about, and we'll talk about infrastructure in a minute, both people and databases, which I know if there is nothing more important, it is making sure everything is sort of well-oiled on the back end as well. But you spoke a little bit about how Emily is a really talented fundraiser. We're very lucky at the Institute. Jim, I'm not sure if he's on this call right now, but maybe he'll watch the recording, is also an excellent sort of community builder with partners and funders. And that is really, really important. So as folks are thinking about sort of building fundraising programs, what's the role of leadership? What's the role? How do you see now, you guys are a year plus in, your role versus Emily's role? How do you guys work together? How do you work separately? How's all that work coordinated? And how should folks think about their CEO engagement with funders in the community, especially as they're launching?
So I think that there are a few ways. And I think one that should never be underestimated is Emily she talks about revenue internally. She makes it okay. There are a lot of news organizations, revenue is kind of a necessary evil. It feels icky to a lot of newsrooms, people in newsrooms, especially, I think people who've been around for longer than maybe some of the younger people, honestly. And I've been doing this for 20 years, so I've seen kind of a little bit of a shift. But I think in general, and understandably, right? It's like, I don't touch that. I don't know what's going on over there. It doesn't affect me. So first of all, her role as a leader, the overall leader, is that she's also a revenue leader and an editorial leader. And so what she's able to do internally is she's allowed to make it okay for editorial to be interested, and for us to talk about what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean we are so firmly established in our editorial integrity. I'm proud of it. But it's not a dirty word. So I think, first of all, that is really instrumental. Externally, she is always going to have certain relationships from the beginning, right? She was the primary fundraiser before we launched and at launch. And those relationships are going to continue. People are going to want to be with Emily, and they should. They were our earliest supporters. And I think there are also some level of funders that most likely they're going to want to meet with her. And I think that is totally understandable as well. But I think that the baton does have to be passed to, and each organization has to make the decisions in terms of what that looks like for them. I happen to have a lot more corporate experience and foundation experience. I have less experience with the major donors. Our major donor director is amazing, and she's done a lot in terms of getting me up to speed. I'm learning on the job, which I actually love. I love being humbled and I love to learn. And so this has been an area where I have to learn, but it's also an area where Emily is really good. And so because I have less experience and and she's really good at that, she's always going to probably lean in more to the major donors than need for the foundations, because I feel really good in the foundations, right? So each organization is a little bit different, but I think what's really important is, for me, culturally, it's really important for everyone on your team, it doesn't matter where, to have a sense of ownership. And the only way you can do that is to know what you're responsible for. So I think it's important to define it. I don't think it has to be defined immediately. We are still figuring this out, right? We're now 11 months in. We're really now in the throes of like, what does it look like? Where is Emily fitting in? Where are we asking for her help? Where is she leading efforts? And what does it look like when we're supporting her, right? When she's involved in the work, and where is the vacuum where we can fill without her, right? And I think that needs a lot of communication, because I think founders want to lean into everything. They're good at everything, right? This is their baby. And but the only way to create a really functional place where everyone feels like they have a place in the success is they have to know exactly what their role is. So I can't say that we're not 100% of the way there, but I think we're really making progress in terms of where we should be fitting in, where we should be filling that vacuum, and sometimes it ebbs and flows, right? Like there are times she's needed more in the newsroom, and there are times she's needed less. But it's important to encourage the founder to let go of some again, whatever you define, so that you have your play space. She has her play space, right? And that you're all feeling like you have a sense of ownership over something. And I think that's really important. And I think it's really hard because everyone wants to hold on tightly, especially when you're a tiny organization like we are. We're all taking on a lot of responsibility. How about you? How do you handle that?
Well, I think it's interesting that you say, especially when organizations are growing, we could often refer to ourselves at the Institute as like a gangly teenager. We're 5 years old. We're really still new. And I think a lot about one of the great benefits of being new and building something from scratch is like CRM and infrastructure. I've worked a lot of places in fundraising where you come into some very antiquated system that has been around for years. I spent a number of years prior to this role at the Institute at United Way, which is 100-plus-year-old organization, and the reliance on paper files. I think often about the fact that like we left office one day and never came back, although I'm here now. We didn't come back for a really long time. And from a fundraising perspective, we didn't miss a beat because everything was digital, because we started in the digital age. Whereas I think about, had I been in that former role, how many times I would open up a filing cabinet to find what I needed, because there were decades of paperwork that of course didn't live in the database. The database was never going to be as old as the organization. And so, I think a lot of like, it's the people infrastructure, but then it's the other infrastructure behind you, so that coordination you talked about with Emily and the rest of your team can be efficient, right? Everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, but then also everybody has the information at their fingertips in a way that they can access. And I think that one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about the founder piece, which I imagine for folks on the call who are part of a growing or new fundraising program, so easy for us to have things in our heads, right? Yeah. And to forget that one day we may move on, or we just might win the lottery and move to Bora Bora, as I like to say. And are we leaving our institutions in places where somebody else can come in and be really successful and hit the ground running? Or is everything, because we have so much ownership and pride over this great work that we've helped to build, like, is too much of it internal? And so at the Institute, we have Salesforce. We started using it a little more than 3 years ago. We've done a lot of work to sort of bring it along with us as we've been growing. So this year so far, about 2,500 donors, 9,000 gifts in the system. Like, we are well beyond an Excel spreadsheet, right? It would be impossible. How have you guys thought about CRM and a database sort of helping to support your growth, both from an institutional knowledge and, in Emily's relationships and the work of your team, but also sort of from a, like, how can we be more functional with more sort of back end support to help us get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, we are playing a little bit of catch up. It was a really hectic time when we launched, and especially with COVID. I mean, nothing went as planned. But I will say this, like, we are now in the process, we're really getting our CRM tidied up. It's exciting because we are like you. I mean, we have, in terms of major donors, we have over 300. We have about 11,000 donors that are under 1,000. We have 50 sponsors. There's a lot of data. And so we are now in the process of this. And so my recommendation, and I don't know if anyone's kind of at the beginning, but is, first things first is, like, the tech platform is the investment in it is just, it's a necessity. And I think that, it's easy to think, oh, maybe we can catch up. It's so much harder later. And so for us, we had to really think about what data do we want in a year, 2 years, 5 years? And then we have to figure out what information is valuable. Now, this is always hard because with an online giving tool, you don't want to make it so hard and ask so many questions that people drop off. But at the same time, we wanted to figure out what is the information that we needed, right? Like the name and, where do you live and how can you come to us? Because ultimately, we use Fundraise Up and it all goes into our CRM. And then that is where we can start really thinking about how do we strategize around this? How are people engaging? Like, every newsletter subscriber is in the CRM. So we can see, and do they donate? Is it a recurrent gift? Is it a one-time gift? So that we can then really figure out, not only for Emily, but for our team, like, how do we have so many members that are donating anywhere from $19 to $999. How do we move those, the people that we feel could be donating more to us? And so we have basically created parameters in terms of what information do we really want to make sure that we have. And I think, again, the thing that is just a must is making sure that the online giving platform is speaking to the CRM. And then the other thing that we didn't do, I think would probably be worthwhile for someone else starting out, is bringing on an actual product expert and a programmer, because the information is in, right? And we're in the process now of creating reports, like, we're doing all of this work. But to do that at the beginning, I think, probably would have you're getting into the data immediately. So, I think that, again, there were so many needs at the beginning, and especially with COVID, there were so many things that we wanted to do that we couldn't. We had to prioritize. My recommendation is, don't do that, right? Like, just make sure that you've got your CRM, before you launch any system, advocate for it and make sure that, trying to play catch up is just, it ends up taking up more time and money probably in the end, than just doing it at the beginning. So that's just my bit of feedback, but it is really exciting now to be in the CRM and to see how much we can do in it. And it's like an adventure. Every day is like, oh, what report can we pull? This is exciting.
Yeah, I like to think about the fact that in terms of like data, do I have enough data on you to wealth screen you?
Yes.
If I have your name and your address, what else can I communicate with you, and can I wealth screen you? So we've really shied away from like any sort of Facebook and Instagram fundraising, because for us, if we're going to build a sustainable program, although the revenue is not, of course, revenue is revenue, and you want to be bringing as much resource in as possible. If I can't communicate with you, if I can't say thank you, if I can't engage you in our work, either in our virtual or in-person programming, if I can't learn more about you, we just got our Spotlight PA team got a really, really wonderful gift the other day from a donor that gave, I mean, he's given significantly more over the past 2 years, but $25 for the first time in November of 2019. And that's how donors, I've always seen this in my career. You look back at some of your best supporters and some of the folks who are so committed, and they very rarely started with a $10,000 gift. They often started with something much smaller, and then they became more, and you can't do that without their email, without their address, without their name. And so you can learn anything you need to learn with a good wealth screening tool or a lot of Google beyond that. But that to me is always like the thing you really, the bare bones data you need from the moment. The other thing I would add about CRM for folks starting out, obviously you guys have grown exponentially, and there's some comments in the chat about, I mean, you have 33 people on your masthead already, 11 months in, which is so amazing. But we also we work with News Revenue Hub at the Institute. They have been a phenomenal partner. And so a lot of that like back end tech support happens there, right? There are vendors and partners that can help you connect your CRM to your giving page, to your communication tools. And I think in that you give up a little bit of your ability to be super, super customized. But what you gain is, if you don't have a product person or a tech person on staff, or you don't necessarily have the capacity to think through all those connections, you gain the support of a team that's doing that for you and learning best practices from across the field. And so there are resources like that, especially for smaller news organizations starting out, that they can tap into, which I think is super important. Mm-hmm. There was a question, I'm just scrolling for a second, but a question from Jill from Cityside, and I'm not sure if any of you here today were on the 4 to 5 call that we had yesterday afternoon that Jill was on, but she's mentioning here infrastructure and the balance of that. And her question made me think of a comment she made yesterday around how when she was starting off, when she was in her career, she would often hear from people like, you don't have enough major gift experience. And so when we think about infrastructure, at least when I think about infrastructure for us and what we need, like you don't have to have fundraising experience to be excellent at development, but you do need to have good customer service experience. You need to like understand, what do people want? Like you need to have empathy. You need to have good EQ. You need to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. What is this donor expecting from me? And I've often found that sometimes in past roles working with colleagues, sometimes the folks with the best major gift experience, especially if it comes from a university or a hospital system, they actually don't have a lot of those other skills because they've never been somewhere where they've had to be scrappy, where they've had to like they have somebody's writing their proposals for them, and they get to do this really amazing focused body of work around major giving, but they don't necessarily see all the other pieces of the organization and how it all comes together, and they don't have to build that from the ground up. So as you think about the infrastructure on your team, what are you looking for? Because you guys are, you've gotten larger, but you're still so new. So what's most important to you in people infrastructure as well?
On the revenue team?
On the revenue team, and sort of how you've had to prioritize, like how do you balance the need for folks who are going to be out the door raising money, but also behind the scenes adding the right notes into the database? Or how do you think about the balance of responsibilities and expectations?
Well, we're so lean that we're actually doing a lot of both. The revenue side, this is actually operations is going to be a place where we're going to be investing next year. We did a lot of investment on the editorial side. And now we're catching up on the operations side. So ultimately right now it's 3 of us. We do it all. We do our own research. We're kind of in between admin roles. We're actually in the process of looking for a revenue and development associate currently who will help us with some of this stuff, right? Help us identify, do some research, do briefings for us, put notes in the database, all of those great things. But right now we're doing it all ourselves. And so honestly, that's where the operations does fall off, unfortunately, because that's where the industry knowledge is. And so in some ways, like not having the CRM up and running yet was like, well, we don't really have time anymore anyway. So, but we're really excited to have an admin person join us and really help with that. And, for me, the way that I think about it is, Jenny and Anne and I should be externally facing out as much as possible, right? Like doing a little research is great, but when you're spending more research than picking up the phone, then you've got a problem. You really just want to be out as much as you can. Now, obviously, we are not in an out environment yet. We are mostly sitting in our houses doing Zoom, which unfortunately is just incredibly transactional. For me, I always say this is not about a sprint. This is about a marathon. I don't care if I get a short amount of money right now to fulfill X, Y, and Z, but I lose out on the long-term relationship. It is not worth it to me. Always choose the long-term relationship because we want people to think about that. We want people to be engaged with our product. We want them to see the value that they're bringing, and we want to help them see that. And so, for me, when I think about people, I want people who see the marathon, not the sprint, that care about the mission. They want to align with people who care about what we care about. Identifying those people, bringing their experience, or just bringing a scrappy approach where they're uncovering new groups of people or new potential donors. That's so important to me. And so that goes back to people who take on a sense of ownership, who feel like they are their own entrepreneur. I always say that, like, your territory is your business. That's you're an entrepreneur. And how do you want to see that succeed? I like people who are really self-motivated, right? In development and revenue, you have every day nothing to do and everything to do, and it's your choice. And so you want people who are just say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to slay this, and I think that the mission is so important to that, right? It's like, what's driving you is beyond you. This is not about a win for you. This is about a win for the organization, a win for the mission, a win for representative journalism. And so those are a couple of things that I think about. And honestly, we're really excited to have an admin person, because I think what we're going to see is we're going to be able to go 2.0 in terms of the amount of time that we're face to face with clients, and hopefully in person, because that's where you build those relationships more, right? You're talking about family, you're talking about hobbies, you're talking about more than just what is the transaction here. And that's ultimately where we want to get back.
That's wonderful. I also think, sort of to Jill's question, also, it's like tapping into other resources you have. So you're a lean team. We're a lean fundraising team here. Do you have board members who can help write thank you notes? Are there folks on the editorial side who can help write a thank you note, or steward a donor, or call to say thank you? And are you utilizing sort of all of those things as well? And there is definitely back end work that then has to happen. They need the address, or they need the phone number. They need to be told. But you're also helping everybody understand how important that revenue is, and they can be part of that donor's journey, even if they're not just on the fundraising side.
I love that.
So you're a year in, and so you're starting to, articulate, I'm sure, impact and measurement and what you've achieved and accomplished to funders. How are you prioritizing that? I think it's often, especially on the institutional funding side, grants are great, the back end reporting can be so taxing and so challenging, especially when you have multiple funders, even if they're funding the same thing, who all want their reports in different ways. So how are you guys prioritizing sort of measuring impact, reporting impact back, and thinking about that as sort of part of the key to sustainable 19th?
We are very lucky that everyone, our co-founder, Amanda Zamora, is very metrics focused. We have clear KPIs. We have clear, we know what our goals are. We know when we've hit them, when we've missed them. We have solutions for when we've missed, like an audience target or whatever it is. And so in a lot of ways, the reporting, I mean, it's a lot. And again, we are a lean team. So Anne, who is our foundation director, she's not only out there getting meetings and talking to people about incoming grants, she's also doing all the reporting. It's onerous for our CFO as well, but obviously so important. But for a lot of the measurements, it's something that we're already doing organizationally. It's part of our DNA because our co-founder cares about that. So in some ways, our audience team already has those numbers, and our product people has the other numbers. And so there's a lot, we may have to gather them month to month, but that they are in existence. This is not something that our team necessarily has to create. We're just gathering the data. I think our CFO, that's a lot of that information it's all in different, there's no one way to report revenues and look at outlooks. That I think that's honestly probably the most onerous. The other thing is that not all of our grants, but a lot of our grants are for general operating. That's not exclusively, but that's really what we're hoping when we go out and find funding. And so there's less, we have some grants where we have to actually, count stories or, in a general topic area, but mostly they're general operating. So there's a fair amount that we can reuse over time. It may be in a different format, but most people are interested in where we are, where we've been, where we're going. And a lot of that, again, is information that is across the organization.
That's so important. And I think it's, not, you guys are new, and you're able to sort of build that into your DNA. And for folks who are launching fundraising programs or starting to get philanthropic dollars into historic, especially legacy news organizations, it is so hard to get folks to think differently, because the revenue they have, all the subscriber, when you're a subscriber and you're paying for the paper or you're paying for online access, you're getting something in return. There's a product delivery, right? So I'm a Peloton user. I don't email Peloton to ask them for the impact of my subscription. I get something that I value. And when I stop valuing it, I may cancel it, but it's not a film. There's an immediate return. And so our subscribers and advertisers get something, and philanthropic dollars are so different. They don't get anything except for the joy of supporting this mission, right? So you can be a $10,000 donor to the 19th and have the same access to 19th content as somebody who doesn't support it at all. And so thinking about how it becomes a part of your DNA, or who are the few champions in your organization who can help folks start to understand why impact and results and measuring things that you don't have to necessarily measure for your subscriber, a paying subscriber base, is so different in the philanthropic space. And so important. The other thing there's a question in here from Mickey at the Minnesota Women's Press, and she was asking here about sort of building audience, especially without print readership and the visibility in the newspaper. And so you talked a little bit earlier about some key partnerships you had at the Post, at the Inquirer when you first launched. I would also highlight, we launched Spotlight PA, which is a digital first. It's very similar to like the Texas Tribune. It's covering the state house and state government, but in Pennsylvania. And it's been through partnership. Growing revenue and growing audience. They are in 77 publications and papers and media outlets across the state of PA, reaching millions of people. Now they have a huge following at spotlightpa.org, but they didn't initially. It was about those partnerships and putting their content out there. How have you guys, what areas, we talked about the summit, we talked about some of those early partnerships. So what are you still continuing to do to build audience, especially as a digital? enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, it's diversification of this too, right? It's we hired a director of partnerships who is working with us on that, right? Is not only larger news organizations like Univision, takes the news they feel is relevant to their audience and translates it into Spanish, but also local news organizations and Black owned, women owned or operated smaller news organizations. That's something that we're really focused on. We also have audience engagement. We have an audience director. We have an audience engagement team. And, for like events and now with virtual, I mean, obviously there is some infrastructure that you have to put in place, but, that is a moment in time where you can then create a social marketing opportunity to bring in new audiences, especially if they're, for instance, doing an event on education brings in its own audience versus one on climate justice, which brings in another audience, right? You're broadening every time you do another topic area, you're bringing in potentials. And one of the things that we have done a little bit, not much, is we do a little bit of a paid campaign around it, right? Because it's like, well, the people that are already engaged with us already know about this event. But this is an opportunity. I mean, we did one on business, small business for Small Business Month, and we then did a little campaign on LinkedIn, right? Because that would be an area where business owners are engaging, and they may be interested in this. They may not even know we exist yet. So being targeted on social, and partnerships, right? So thinking about that, and then working backwards in terms of your products. Like I'm reading here that, gender-based violence, right? So are there specific groups that you could be reaching out to? When I ran events at National Journal and we would do regional events, we would go to new places, and it was really hard. So what we did is we did a lot with partnerships. We didn't partner with advocacy organizations. We only did it with nonprofits, other groups, but ultimately to help us build audience, to help us bring in speakers, so I do think partnerships is a huge part of that, especially because it's based in Minnesota. So that gives you a finite universe to go out and say, okay, who are the people that we would want to target to see if they would be interested in partnering with us? Are there nonprofits? Are there business groups? Are there, X, Y, and Z, and see how we can get out in front of new audiences and bring them back to the platform.
That's so important. And I think that oftentimes in journalism, we talk a lot about collaboration, but there's also ways to coordinate. Right? It doesn't always have to be two organizations working hand in hand all the time to produce something. It's who can your organization coordinate with, so that, when I mentioned Spotlight's model, I think one of the things that's so important about it is they do report in collaboration at times, but they also just partner and distribute. So it's not all, you don't have to, you can be thinking about what organizations could we be speaking at? Could we do a blog post for? Could we, it's not always working hand in hand. Sometimes just sort of working alongside each other. We all bring different skills to the table, and our organizations have a different unique vantage point. And sometimes just sort of matching up those puzzle pieces is really important, as opposed to always having to build the puzzle hand in hand. So I think, obviously, what in the Portraits of the Pandemic you talked about, if I remember correctly, Erin's work ran in the Inquirer.
It did.
It ran in the Inquirer,
and it ran in the Inquirer, and she's based in Philly, and that was a partnership. You had, Erin lives there, even though she's a national, she was editor at large for the 19th. She lives in Philly. That is her hometown. This is her hometown paper, and that's the thing. And Mickey, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm going to just drop my my email here, that I'm happy to talk to you, because I think, oh shoot, now I've lost my train of thought. Thinking about varied goals, everyone has different goals, right? And so when you're approaching about a partnership, what are the goals? A lot of organizations are hungry for content. That is that's what marketing is about now, right? It's all about marketing content. People are starving for content. So how, news organizations have the benefit of having content. So finding groups that, I mean, almost every website needs content right now. So even just saying, if you have a website, I mean, again, like Mickey, I'm happy to sit down and brainstorm a little bit about this with you, but that everyone wants content. And as long as you're, there's a link back to us, right? That people can then come back to us. That would be a good partnership because the goals align. And I think always starting with the goals. What do they want to accomplish? What do we want to accomplish? And coming up, and actually, when you talk about that as a news organization, you know where to not partner, right? Because for us, like we partner with other news organizations to actually put our content out, right? But when people come to us and say, we'd love to put your name on our content, that's not where we want to partner, because we are completely in charge of our own content. We do not let anyone else write our content. Our reporters are the only ones. We don't even have op-eds. We don't have submissions. Like, our content is ours. So knowing what the goals are help you, pivot away from people where the goals are not aligned, and also allow you to talk about things kind of more holistically. And maybe even partner with groups that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about.
And right, it gets your content into more places, more people see you, they become part of your funnel ultimately. And then, you're asking them for donations. I know we're approaching the end of our hour, but one thing I wanted, as we're thinking about building a program, we talked about, in the 19th, philanthropy is in your DNA. For many legacy news organizations, there are other kinds of revenue maybe in their DNA, or the revenue in the DNA is really the separation between revenue and the editorial side. When you think about building community and asking, if I were to think of sort of one like parting piece of advice, it would be that nobody knows that you need their money if you don't actually ask them for it. Nobody knows that they're able to invest in the organization in a meaningful way unless you tell them they are. So one of the things I was very struck by when we first launched the community giving campaign at the Inquirer in a very public way in December of 2019 was how many people emailed me and they were just like, I've been a subscriber for 30 years. I've been asking what else I can do. But if I wasn't an advertiser, or it was like, you can advertise or you can pay for the paper and there's no other way. And here we were starting to say to people, yes, there is another way. This is how else you can support this mission. How do you think about, not being too loud, but being loud enough and consistently asking folks to be philanthropic and support the mission of the 19th?
We're loud. I mean, when we were designing our website, that was huge for us, is that there was an opportunity. In fact, we have a right rail, and every once in a while there's a homepage takeover with an ad in it, but mostly it is about becoming a member. And I think that that's where the shared mission, it's in, becoming a member, becoming part of our community. It's also supporting us, but it's also about being a part of something bigger than yourself. And so I would say we're actually pretty loud about it. And we're not shy about it. And in fact, thinking about aligning with Newsroom, right? And not being ashamed. I mean, when Erin Haynes was first, at launch, she does it less now, but when at launch, she would say, we're a nonprofit. You can become a member by going to 19thnews.org. And you would just see, we have a Slack channel for the entire organization that is just the incoming donations. And you could literally see, did she do a spot last night at 11 p.m.? Because you could just see all of the donations coming in, and she was not afraid to say it. I mean, do you want this to be part of your media diet? Do you want us to exist? This is important. And so are all news organizations, right? This is important work. This is work that promotes democracy and being informed and civics. And it's so important to ask. And so be loud and be proud. Again, I think, it's important to really talk about what you're supporting, what kind of community you're joining. And so our mission is very forward everywhere. And it's a mission that resonates right now. I think that also helps. But I do think that we're probably pretty loud about it.
Well, that is good. No money, no mission, and no one gives if they're not asked. So I think that's those are two really important things to really leave this group with, is you have to be loud. It has to be part of your DNA. I love the Slack channel idea. I think there's nothing better. We don't have a Slack channel that the Inquire team can see, but oftentimes when we're doing a campaign, I'll email like the great comments we get from donors, right? So they know that there are people on the other end who care so deeply about their work that they're willing to give well beyond their subscription. Well, thank you all. Sean, I'll turn it back to you. Johanna left her email in the chat. There's also a Google Doc for this session. We'll make sure that our emails are in there. Please do get in touch with us. We're so grateful for you sharing all of the great work of the 19th with us and building your program. And congratulations on a very successful first year. We look forward to many, many, many more years of great reporting.
Congratulations on 3. So wonderful.
Well, that institute's 5. It's just me.
Okay, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you all for joining us and being a part of this really great conversation. We will be saving the chat, and also this session has been recorded and will be posted again once the summit is complete. But I hope everyone enjoyed the session, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
And I just put the Google Doc in the chat if anybody needs it.
Perfect. Thanks, Rebecca. Stop recording.